Welcome back, folks. This is Chance with Apocalypsis Historia. It's been a long time no see. Good to be back. We're here today talking about a topic we've touched on before, but we wanted to give a quick, laser-focused, razor-sharp take on it and try to be complete and whole and kind of in the argument and start to tilt what we think is dangerous narrative away from what seems to me to be gaining a little bit of prominence and try to eventually quelch this hypothesis and get it away from the Shakespeare authorship theory, and that is the idea that Shakespeare is both the upstart crow and the Poet-Ape. We're not going to talk too much today about the upstart crow, still waiting on David Richardson and Dennis McCarthy to have their big debate. Think it's still going to happen. It just keeps getting pushed along, and they still are hammering out details. But Dennis will be arguing that William Shakespeare or Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon is indeed the upstart crow, but not indeed the author of the whole and best of the canonical works. Whereas David Richardson is going to argue that William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon is nothing of the kind. He's not really even supposed to be documented as part of the theater scene when that green pamphlet comes out. And so we want to talk more about the latter accusation that this William Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon is the Poet-Ape, as Ben Jonson writes in a poem that comes out in 1616, maybe as early as 1612. It's possible that it's a poem written much earlier, because when it comes out in a collected works. It is a sonnet called On Poet-Ape, and it is in so-called Shakespearean form, where it has the Shakespearean A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D rhyme scheme with the ending rhyming couplet following the specific brand of iambic pentameter that we see in all these sonnets. Therefore, it must be about Shakespeare. I'm not too in love with that argument. I think a lot of people use this rhyme scheme, and writing sonnets was totally par for the course. And I think Ben Jonson is here talking about a different character than William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon. If you've watched our previous live stream, I tell you that it's Thomas Dekker, and I'm going to tell you the same thing today. And at the very least, if I don't convince you of that, I at least want to dispel some surrounding sort of issues that I see with people's understanding of this poem. So, let me see. Let's start with maybe going into some of the people that are championing this theory in the Shakespeare authorship circles. And some of the bigger names that I see pushing this are, say, Ross Barber, over here on her blog, Bardly True, which I know she does more current work on her Substack instead of her blog. But her blog is still out there on Google for anybody to, do any kind of Google search. It'll pop up for a lot of these ideas because she's aware of them and bringing them up. But one of her things is that she backs up the idea that Ben Jonson is talking about William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon is the Poet-Ape. And I don't too much agree with it, and we're going to go into some of her exact claims and sort of dispel and analyze and do all sorts of stuff there. But another one that's bringing this up is Sabrina Feldman. And so Ross Barber here, she's a Marlovian, or I guess sort of an agnostic at this point. I think Marlowe's lost so much steam that she sort of backed off and said, hey, there's a lot more to this than I thought going into it. And I totally sympathize with her there, because I feel the same way, that you get deeper and deeper into this and there's just so many details, there's so much time, so many documents, that you start to see that it's not just exactly one guy will answer all these questions. And so Sabrina Feldman is a fan of Thomas Sackville as Shakespeare, And she also is open to other people working with Sackville, but she thinks that Sackville may be the mind behind it, or at least that he is under-researched, and better understanding him would help better understand Shakespeare, and I also can sort of sympathize with that. If you don't know who Thomas Sackville is, he was himself a Lord Buckhurst. He's an old guy. He's almost, same age as like Leicester and Elizabeth. He writes one of the first great early plays in Gorboduc from, 1569 or something like that, maybe earlier. Sydney basically says, yeah, it's the only decent play.
The one, we've talked about that multiple times in our Sydney videos, too.
It's the only decent play that England's ever put out, so it's notable to me because just one little tangent here. This is something David and I have been talking about in our book club.
Yeah, shout out if you want to have more Shakespeare in-depth analysis, if you want to join our weekly book clubs. We're kind of going through like an act week in these Shakespeare plays, and man, Chance and David will bring the heat and bring all the factoids about every little in and out and bit of reference or whatever, right? So if you're interested, check all the links down below. But yeah, what were you talking about with David, though?
And so David and I have just been talking about some of our issues with, there's multiple contingents or theories that want to say that we need to redate the Shakespeare chronology, that we need to take the Shakespeare play timeline that the Orthodox has worked out, toss it out the window, and we need to recognize that there's so much in these plays that are referencing stuff from the 70s and 80s, and that we need to go back and redate a lot of these plays to being in the 70s and 80s, and Dennis McCarthy's one of them. Sabrina Feldman, I think, is open to that as well as a ton of Oxfordians. But David and I are not fans of that. And if anything, it makes less sense of the whole timeline from Elizabeth all the way into James and the actual timeline that we see of the Shakespeare documents. However, the point being that anybody that wants to date Shakespeare plays to being in the 70s or being out before 81, they do have to recognize that Philip Sidney's saying that play's not worth a damn and it's not better than Gorboduc. So if you think that Hamlet or Macbeth or something is out before Defense of Poetry by, Philip Sidney, who's writing it in response to Stephen Gosson's 79 essay, you basically saying a play that's out by 79 or earlier, you were basically saying that, Macbeth's not as good as Gorboduc, at least in Philip Sidney's eyes, and you can say that Philip Sidney maybe doesn't line up eye to eye perfectly with some of these people, but to say that he thinks that Gorboduc's better than Shakespeare's Macbeth, well, that's silly. I don't think Philip Sidney would ever say that. If Philip Sidney somehow was able to read Shakespeare's Macbeth, I think he would totally acknowledge that play was much, much better than Gorboduc, okay? I don't... and so Sidney doesn't mention them, and then anybody that wants to say that he is mentioning them, like with the reference to the ship in the storm and the cave, that is to the Tempest, well... Once again, that's Sidney saying that Tempest play is not as good as Gorboduc. So, if there is a Tempest play out pre-81, I sincerely doubt it is anything like the canonical Shakespeare play that we have. I think, if anything, it's an early source play. That's what you could say. And so, I think that's just something that anybody that's trying to push back the timeline needs to start being really careful about their terminology, about what exactly they're claiming. I think a lot of people, what they mean is that there's earlier source plays or earlier versions that get heavily reworked and revived in later periods of time, that reviving and reworking is when it begins to look like Shakespeare. I'm cool with that idea, but to say that canonical or, Quarto edition Shakespeare is some stuff from 70s or 80s Elizabethan era, that no. Okay, sorry for that tangent, but let's bring it back to On Poet-Ape. So, the first thing that I want to bring up, we didn't show Dennis's blog, but I don't want to show Dennis's blog, so we're not going to show Dennis's blog because I don't like Dennis's blog. But Dennis is also a fan of the Poet-Ape theory, and he probably champions it as loudly as any Shake seen upon any stage. He definitely bombasted out. I will say that. So I want to maybe just point out one that I think there's this weird misunderstanding that people think Poet-Ape means actor. So I was reading Barry Clark's book, one of Barry Clark's books or thesis or essays or whatever that it is. It's a big old 100-page book about Bacon being in Shakespeare. And in it, Barry Clark was, had a little tiny passage about Poet-Ape being about Shakespeare, the Stratford man. I was like, oh, Barry, what are you doing here? Because I kind of like Barry, because Barry's kind of pitching what Brady and I have been pitching, independent of me ever hearing about Barry, or obviously vice versa. But Barry's basically an updated version of the John Stotzenberg theory that we champion pretty heavily, that says, well, no, a lot of Shakespeare's got Henslow writers in it. And maybe more Dekker than anyone. And Barry Clark has his own approach, and oddly enough, Barry Clark, like John Stotzenberg, went into Shakespeare trying to basically attribute it all to Bacon, and in doing so, found out that, well, I can't just attribute this all to Bacon, and plenty of other people make a lot more sense, and Barry does some really good modern stuff. He's pretty hip to the academic scholarly jive as far as attribution studies go, and he's reading McDonald P. Jackson, quoting Vickers, talking about Eliot and Valenza, and using all sorts of stylometric stuff, Hugh Craig, all that good stuff. Barry Clark's like up there with those guys, following, keeping up, doing all the stylometric stuff, doing the old school Cyrus Hoy stuff. Yeah, that's him. That's for sure him. And so look, forward by Sir Mark Rylance. Barry's got some.
Well, I don't know about that, because I go on Alan Green's website and it's like suggested by Sir Mark Rylance. You got this guy by Sir Mark Rylance.
The point is, we have yet to get the Sir Mark Rylance stamp, and he has it. So I gotta hats off.
Kier Cutler, sponsored by Mark Rylance. You see where I'm going with this?
Can we get a forward by Kier at least?
We can probably. I can afford that one.
Okay, I can afford that one.
That's not a diss to him, but I'm just saying.
No. That's more of a diss to my wallet. All right, sorry.
Both of our wallets, we can afford one Kier. Yeah.
Yes, well, that's how that Philip Sidney, horoscope worked, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. All right. At any rate, so Barry R. Clark, at one point in this book, brings up on Poet-Ape, and he's talking. It's a very short chapter. I wish he'd just excise it, and maybe he has sense. I don't know. But in that chapter, he just goes on Poet-Ape and suggests Ben Jonson's talking about the Stratford man. And who does he quote? He quotes Sabrina Feldman, showing that Poet-Apes mean actors, because Sabrina herself says that. And Sabrina quotes Satiromastix to show that. Quotes Poetaster to show that. But her quote on the Poetaster is a misquote, and she's wrong. She misreads it. It clearly shows that Poet-Ape means not actors. Ape is an actor. A Poet-Ape is something different. Ape can totally mean actor.
So, just to recap once again, you said that, Barry here, basing his evidence and stuff and citing Sabrina here, and so it's just a bad, I've used this metaphor before, but it's like getting a Sudoku wrong. You get one thing wrong, you start throwing everything off, right?
Yep.
And kind of like what we said about Looney in a sense too, right? All right, guys, hey, he like threw out all the Tempest. Like, doesn't that sort of upset some of any of his other premises?
Yeah.
If y'all want to accept that one, so just the same thing here in the same vein.
And so, I don't think Barry really needs to too heavily make that argument. It's just something that he's trying to put in there to sort of continue to wedge the gap between the Orthodox and I think the heterodox folks like us that want to doubt Shakespeare. He's got to have something in there that gives reason to doubt. And I'm not sure that I'm totally online with that philosophy or not. I think there's maybe a workaround with it. I know Keir Cutler's a big fan of that philosophy as well. But I've found that it just turns into this bizarre overreaching where we end up overreaching in an opposite way of how the Orthodox people overreach to make him an author. And so the Orthodox like, oh, he's the upstart crow, and then the doubters like, no, he's the Poet-Ape, and it's like, don't those say the same fucking thing? Like, one says he's taking lines from other people and acting like he's the real deal, but he's not, and one says he's taking lines from other people and acting like the real deal, but he's not, and it's like, I don't quite understand what the claims are here. It doesn't make much sense to me either way. But the point being that we need to maybe start to make sense of a framework as a whole, and in order to do that, let's maybe just look at the thing as it is and quit trying to pinpoint it to, this guy on my jacket, and let's just look at it for what it is and see if it at all relates to the guy on the jacket and figure out how. And so let's go back to the Poetaster. Do we get that tab up real quick?
This one?
Yeah. So in it, there should be over there on the search bar, we got Poet-Ape. Scroll here. Okay. So here's the passage, and it says, "How might I force this?" Let me start earlier. I am prevented, all my hopes are crossed, checked and abated. Fie, a freezing sweat flows forth at all my pores, my entrails burn. What should I do? Roam? Oh, my vexed soul, how might I force this to the present state? Are there no players here? No Poet-Apes that come with basilisk's eyes, whose forked tongues are steeped in venom as their hearts in gall? And so that's as far as Sabrina ever takes it, and so it makes it sound like, are there no players here? No Poet-Apes, as in the same thing as players? But if she had read the next line after I stopped, it says, either of these would help me. They could wrest, pervert, and poison all they hear or see. So he's saying either of these, as in these are two different things. We have players and Poet-Apes. He wouldn't say either of these.
Would help me.
Yeah, he wouldn't say that if it was just one thing. So they're not quite the same thing, although they do sort of have the same effect on the poet. That they do warp their lines, that they do sort of poorly misrepresent the author. That when they do, they're poisoning literature as a whole. That the whole culture's worse
like bad
off because of it.
exegesis or something,
Yeah,
right? Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that no, Poet-Apes, like this is her citation that Poet-Apes means actors. And if she had read the full section, she would realize that there's no real reason to equate.
And yeah, she says either of these.
Apes.
Otherwise, there would be some more equivocating thing. These actors. Why couldn't she just? Why would he just say that? To kind of sum it all up, right?
Yeah.
And no, he said, "Oh, either of these, as in two distinct things."
Right. So probably, and that's the only citation that I've seen on anybody saying Poet-Ape has to mean actor, and it's like I said, not even here. So I don't think there's really any reason we should say Poet-Ape has to be an actor, and so. I've seen some people say that, Dekker can't be the Poet-Ape because it has to be an actor. And I think maybe Sabrina herself says that. And, no, you made that up. So no. Let's see. Let's maybe go over to some of Ross's arguments, which we have covered before, but I just want to real quickly recover some of these things, and it'll touch back on some of the other folks' arguments. And I know some of you folks that have read enough of this literature are going to say, oh, Chance, you sound just like Oxfraud. And it's like, well, I mean, first of all, if you've read enough of Oxfraud, not all those guys are actually in agreement on this. There's a few, rogue wolves that think that he's talking about the Stratford man, but, they think that the Stratford man did write all of Shakespeare and all of the canonical works, and so that Ben Jonson's actually attacking the author of the canonical works. There's one or two over there in that faction that think that, and then even so, there's a bazillion other things that I do not agree with Oxfraud with or on, and I don't particularly like their tone, and they're like really like, yeah, rah, we're gonna go get him, yeah, and like there's some cool hallway monitors or something. I don't like those guys either, but some of them are pretty decent at their research, and they're not wrong on this one aspect of Poet-Ape, and I think we need to realign our understanding, holistically, once we come to terms with this. So let's look at Ross's page here. Okay, so I'll read a little bit of her thing and then we'll scroll down. From Jonson's description, the identity of Poet-Ape will clearly be a name with which scholars of early modern drama will be familiar, since this person has, quote, grown to a little wealth and credit in the scene, end quote. It is a writer for whose works are, quote, the frippery of wit, end quote. It has been suggested that this poem arose out of the so-called War of the Theatres and is directed at either Dekker or Marston. The War of the Theatres is the same name given to the satirical feud that developed between Jonson on one side and Dekker and Marston on the other, between 99 and 02. Jonson's Poetaster, in which he first used the term Poet-Ape, was part of this feud. If Jonson is calling either Dekker or Marston Poet-Ape, he is presumably accusing them of being bad poets who recycle other people's words. All of this is so far very sensible. Go on, Ross. It was common enough for writers to echo and even in some cases plagiarize parts of other people's works, even to write thinly veiled copies of other people's plays. There were no copyright laws, and theaters required a constant supply of new material. As Bayman puts it in her study of Dekker's prose pamphlets, the habit of plagiarism and reuse of material was so commonplace that it could be considered orthodox literary practice. Though Dekker railed against derivative poets in his pamphlet The Wonderful Year, calling upon the muses to banish these word pirates into the gulf of barbarism, he was distinctly derivative himself. Jonson accused Dekker of plagiarism after the latter's satiromastix used one of Jonson's characters, Tucka, from the Poetaster. Yet there's one word in Jonson's epigram which means we must rule out Dekker's being Jonson's Poet-Ape, and that word is wealth. And this is where I'm going to quit letting her have the microphone. Thank you, Ross. That was great. I'm going to take over now. She says that we must rule out Dekker because the word is wealth. Well, all right. It's a phrase. He doesn't just say wealth. There's a phrase. There's a little adjective behind that word wealth. What's that adjective? Is it gigantic, world controlling wealth? Is it Elon Musky wealth? Is it what's Ben Jonson say? He says a little wealth. A little, just a little. That actually perfectly aptly describes Thomas Dekker, who is the highest paid dramatic writer in the Henslow Diary, in the pretty much peak years of the Elizabethan playwright scene between 98 and 03. Dekker's able to write not only for Henslow, it seems to be writing for several companies. He's able to put out pamphlets. And the thing is that, once again, she stops at wealth. She doesn't say little wealth. But it's not just wealth that he's accusing him of. There's a word after wealth. There's a couple words after wealth. What is the word? Or what are the words? A little wealth and credit. Oh, credit. Credit. Well, Dekker had a ton of credit. That's the whole story of Dekker, is that he's constantly taking bigger and bigger loans, and sometimes he's fine and doing well, but then other times he doesn't pay those loans back and he gets into trouble. And when he's first broken in debt, it's from taking loans, and they're small, tiny loans, but by the at least later 1600s and 1606, '07, '08, he's able to take out pretty big loans relative to his status. I think when he goes to prison in 1612, it's for a debt of over £70 total, which that's years and years worth of local, workaday wages. And so, like, if he's able to take out that much in loans, he's got a lot more money. And I've made this argument before, but I want to make it again. That, yeah, it's a little wealth and credit. That perfectly 100% aptly describes Thomas Dekker circa 1601, 02, 03. It still describes him perfectly well in 1612, and if Johnson is publishing in 1612, it's right around when all the lawsuits start to begin broiling up against Dekker, such that he's in prison by 1613. So that's the only thing that rules out Dekker. Oh, okay, well, he's back in, folks. We didn't need to rule him out at all. That was a stupid thing to say. I don't know why she said that. But I don't know, once again, like, what was Sabrina Feldman's fault? Seemed like she was cherry picking a quote, wasn't she? And what's Ross Barber's fault here? Seems like she's cherry picking a quote, isn't she? Y'all seen this? There's a wider context. You got to read it full through.
What's the solution to checking these people, Chance?
You got to read the stuff yourself. Go read the poem. Go read the play. I read Poet-Ape. When I read through it, I was like, hey, wait a second.
And the same thing about all the labio stuff that you kind of pointed out.
Yeah.
It's like, you're cherry picking one thing out of a giant 400-page, 1,000-page tomb, and trying to craft this whole giant argument around it. And it's like, what if, there's a next page, it's like, by the way, disregard everything I just said. Like, you have no idea. Like,
you don't know.
If it's a whole piece of art or context, you can't divorce it, so.
Absolutely. I like how you said that. Okay, let me see. Let's continue on, because I think she has a couple more things to say that I just want to maybe work through and dispel. So let's see.
Dispelman, perhaps?
Okay, so she says, going on with her Dekker stuff, Dekker was constantly shadowed by debt, according to the Dictionary of National Biography, which the Dictionary of National Biography is not some, like, Dekker expert. I'm going to be honest about that. There's very little biography at all.
We've already gone through this.
Dekker.
Like, no one, the Dekker expert was like, no one can be an expert on this.
Yes. Yeah. Fredson Bowers totally struggles to get Dekker stuff. Grossart, the Elizabethan researchers, like, I have no clue. No man's more of a ghost than this guy. And then, Mary Leland Hunt, who's the actual Dekker biographer, who she should probably quote. That's it. Still, she's like, we don't know too much. We have to go on a lot of the stuff that's in his writings, and he oddly doesn't seem to ever write about his own biography in his writings. Like, never mentions his family or anything, or like. And it's like, I mean, what dramatic writer does? But I guess most of the assumptions are that a lot of these dramatic writers don't have families per se, that they're these working bachelor guys hopping between pamphlets and, working at the printing press place and working at the theater and maybe having to be secretaries and, just hustling all the time. Who's got time for families and all that? And there are people that maybe fit that, like Monday or something, but like, the weird few facts that we can find about some guy named Thomas Dekker, that he seems to have a wife and 3 daughters, and and so it's like, and that his wife dies while he's in prison, and it's like, wait, but we don't know necessarily that that's 100% that Thomas Dekker, you know? Like, if we're going to make these arguments about the Shakespeare title page not being Shakespeare,
does that dispel the idea that this Thomas Dekker name is really popular then or something, right? If, like, they can only find one other dude and, like, maybe that's him? It'd be nice if there was, like, 4 other ones. Like, maybe he's one of these other dudes, but, like, nope, there's only one other Thomas Dekker, just so happens to be, and it's, like, not even, like, clear-cut.
Well, and, like, what makes it worse is that, he's Thomas Dekker, Thomas Dekkers, Thomas Dicker, Thomas Dickers.
Yeah, right.
All of them can be spelled several different ways. I do see, like, some of the, not quite biographers, but some of these literary historians say that he's from Dutch descent and maybe he's a Dutch immigrant, because he seems to give, Dutch people sympathetic kind of moments. And
doesn't he also like lampoon them pretty good too?
and like he also writes more Welsh stuff than anything. Like he has more Welsh scenes with Welsh accents in his plays than any other writer of that time.
Interesting.
So it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like a Dutch dude to me. Like Dutch Welsh, like what? That's a thing. Like yeah, and that's how England was born. I don't know. Like at any rate, back to Ms. Ross Barber, Dr. Professor Ross Barber. And then, yeah, she also says here, he was imprisoned in 1612, spending 7 years behind bars after failing to repay £40, which he had borrowed from the playwright John Webster's father. As I've mentioned in a previous video, or several previous videos, it's probably not John Webster's father that sues him. It's probably John Webster himself, Alan Nelson,
his
and
co-writer buddy.
Yeah, his supposed to be his number one co-writer. That he's writing the Lady Jane plays with, and the Northward and Westward Ho plays with, and the two seem to commend each other in their 1612 and 1613 preface. Which, yeah, she also has the date wrong. He doesn't go to jail in 1612. He goes to jail in 1613. Yeah, and it's not only the £40 to John Webster, it's 30 other pounds to like several other dudes, most of which are in the printing press scene. And so, in the lawsuit from John Webster against Dekker, most of the witnesses or sort of intermediary people that are put in to the case are part of the theatrical scene and theatrical industry, or the printing scene and printing industry, both of which John Webster should have much closer connections to than his father. And so it seems pretty apparent by Nelson's documentary bibliographical argument that, yeah, we're talking about John Webster, the playwright, and not his coach-making, sort of quasi-merchant mogul father.
We covered this in the Thomas Dekker Ghost Handwriting Shakespeare stream, I believe.
Yes,
so yeah, go check out that if you want more information on that.
Okay. And she says, is Marston Johnson's target? And I think that's another interesting question, because I think the clear implication is that both of these guys in Poetaster are something of Poet-Apes. And so maybe there is an element in the poem on Poet-Ape that's maybe pointed at Marston as well, or instead of Dekker. I think it's an interesting argument. I don't see it. I've been reading an unbelievable amount of John Marston lately. Read through The Scourge of Villainies, 15 times. Still have no idea who he's talking about so often. So seldom do I know, that allegorical mention must be this guy. But there are times, and I am starting to unpack it, but that's neither here nor there.
Join the Areopagus book club so we can figure it out.
No kidding. I need help. Me and Mark Hazlitt were trying to decode it. Me and Mark are taking a little break from our correspondence for the moment. So,
AKA floating homes on our comment boards. Man.
Yep. If anybody else is free and available and wants to help try and decode Scourge of Villainies, come find me on Substack. Just do some DMs and go back and forth, and I've been finding that's the best way to do correspondences. It's a little quicker and cleaner than email, and definitely not as constricting as all these other comment boards.
Or one-time Patreon support can get you a Discord access so you can talk to us real time. So we're pretty active on there.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you want to get in on this Discord action, that's probably the best bet. All right, at any rate, she starts making this whole argument about being a broker, or what brokage is, and that that Shakespeare may be practicing brokerage, and maybe that's on this page or a different page, and I won't go too much into it now, because she starts going on about the Parnassus plays, and saying that Gulliver apes poets, and while that's a good point, I do think Gulliver's something of a pretty farcical take on Southampton, aka Gallio. But neither here nor there. Okay, here we go. We get to her argument about reversion. So she says, reversion is a term from property law and its future interest retained by the grantor when the lease expires. The reversion explains how a play might sometimes be performed by another company than the one that owned it. And to buy a reversion of a play would mean that when that agreement expired, the play would belong to the new owner. We have no evidence that Marston bought old plays. I don't know why she says that, because I think there's a pretty big contingent of Marston people that think that Histriomastix, which is maybe his first play, is a rework of an old play for the Inns of Courts. I don't know that he bought it, but I think a lot of people do think that he is reworking an old play. People argue for or against that. Some people argue that he has nothing to do with Histriomastix and that his first plays we see are in the theaters themselves. But then it begs the question, how the hell did he get a job as a fucking playwright opening the children's company theaters again, like being the guy to help revolutionize the children's company's theaters for the first time since John Lillyhad in the 80s? Like, how's he get to be that guy if he had never written a single play? And so it would make sense if he had a really good, not good by our terms, but maybe good on their terms as far as what satirical intent and all that could be in this Inns play of Histriomastix. And it may not be totally Marstonian or great in the sense that he is reworking an old play. So just want to say that, yeah, I don't really like that Barber's trying to pigeonhole Marston away from the possibility that he could have bought old plays. It doesn't seem to be plays plural, it play, and he does seem to do original stuff otherwise from the plays that we have of him. Yeah. At any rate, she says, just because a piece of evidence doesn't exist now doesn't mean that it never did, but we can only argue from the evidence we have. Of course, one can speculate that Marston bought the rights to old plays, but it is most unlikely based on, I don't know what, who knows. He was not a shareholder in an acting company. No, but he was a shareholder in the theater itself of Whitefriars or Blackfriars, I forget which one. And yeah, he did have a lot of money invested into the theaters by the later 1600s. Indeed, very few writers held that particular position, and no one considered a writer of note, except for Shakespeare. And that is a great point. That is this weird point of isolation that William Shakespeare seems to be the only guy in this era that seems to be both a shareholder and a super successful playwright. Although I don't know that that's totally true either. I feel like Heywood does later. He just hadn't at this point to our knowledge. And so maybe asterisk there, because I think Heywood's a candidate for that, but I could be wrong. But okay, from here she goes in this whole thing comparing him to this guy, Edward Juby. And she's like, well, Edward Juby went around buying up old plays for his company. And it's like, yeah, and? Like, what's the point? Juby's going around buying plays for his company. I don't quite understand her point. And she says, well, Shakespeare could be doing the same for his company. And so I'm like, okay, so Ben Jonson's mad at Shakespeare for buying old plays for his company to rework, even though that's common theater practice, that's common standard practice. Where's his poem accusing Edward Juby of being a Poet-Ape?
Why single out this one person?
Yeah. So
is Ben Jonson ever accused of, or do we know if Ben Jonson ever using source plays or reworking a play or anything like that too? Like,
I have
like,
my own.
a weird,
I definitely think that about Catiline and his conspiracies. I don't know if anybody ever accuses him of it. He does seem to rework the Geronimo play for Henslow, whether that's
Geronimo,
or Hieronymo. And so yeah, Geronimo, Hieronymo. It's the J, but you pronounce it in the Spanish.
Right. Okay. So he had a play about an Indian. But
Hieronymo, Could be the Spanish tragedy. It could not be. But at any rate, Johnson seemed to do reworks on that for Henslow. And so he did reworks, but I don't know that he's actively buying up old plays himself to rework. But I don't know that really anybody's necessarily doing that heavily. Even if he's accusing Dekker of this, I don't know that Dekker's doing it that heavily, and I don't think that Shakespeare is doing that either. And if that's the accusation, then it's maybe like some of the Oxford people say that, well, no, that means that Johnson's accusing Shakespeare of making the canonical Shakespeare out of reworking old plays. And so it's like, well, let's maybe we can conflate the two. Maybe, I would want to, but let's see. So let's just look at the poem itself. Let's just go back to the poem. Poor Poet-Ape, that would be thought our chief, whose works are e'en the frippery of wit, from brokage has become so bold a thief, as we, the robbed, leave rage and pity it. At first he made low shifts, would pick and glean, by the reversion of old plays, now grown to a little wealth and credit in the scene. He takes up all, makes each man's wit his own, and told of this, he slights it. Tut, such crimes the sluggish gaping auditor devours. He marks not whose 'twas first, and after times may judge it to be his as well as ours. Fool, as if half eyes will not know a fleece from locks of wool, or shreds from the whole piece. Okay. So it's kind of goofy, it's kind of cryptic, it's definitely not beautiful.
Yeah, it's definitely just, it seems like, how modern rappers will release a rap to, like, you not like us, or, like the Kendrick Lamar, Drake thing or something, right?
Yeah.
It seems like in that vein of, just calling somebody out for something.
Classic poet beef. And so, pull up the poem real quick. Let's just, I don't know if I want to unpack the whole thing line by line, but let's start from the bottom up, actually, because usually sonnets have the conclusion at the end, right? You get the little rhyming couplet, and that's your little summarized conclusion. That's the little turn. That's where we end up. And so he says, "Fool," presumably the Poet-Ape, as if half eyes. So this is curious to me. If half eyes were capitalized, it would for sure mean we're talking about a specific person. It doesn't seem to be capitalized here or in the original, so I want to read it as if it's talking to a specific person, as if we should have a personal, name or nickname here, because I have my own thing about this name Luscus, which gets used in Poetaster and also gets used in Marston's Scourge of Villainies. Luscus in real life was the servant of Ovid, and so if we just have a name that's related to Ovid, and Shakespeare being the predominant Ovidian writer of the 90s with Venus and Adonis and Lucrece, I just think that maybe Luscus is related. And so why am I talking about Luscus? Well, Luscus literally means one eye, or purblind, and that's what half eyes means. Half eyes means somebody with their eyes only half open and can't quite see. They only have, half their vision, if you will. And so I'm just wondering if maybe that's a sort of motif that Johnson just uses for a lot of people, but I do wonder if it's related to this Luscus, because in Marston's Scourge of Villainies, the only clear actual Shakespeare reference to me, and I don't know that he's talking about the author itself, but the only time that he's clearly talking about a work of Shakespeare directly, because I do not think his labio line is talking about Venus and Adonis directly, and come at me, bro, like, I'll prove you wrong. He's not in that line talking directly about Venus and Adonis, but in a later line in the Scourge of Villainies, he says, Luscus, I'm the one that broached your mouth, and from whence pure Romeo and Juliet came, or from whence pure Juliet and Romeo comes, something like that. And so, who's this Luscus that's has Romeo and Juliet coming out of his mouth in 98 or 99? Is it this half-eyed person? Who knows? But it says, Half eyes will not know a fleece from locks of wool. And this is the point I really want to make. Or shreds from the whole piece. And that last line sums it up perfectly. Shreds from the whole piece. We have a part to a whole relationship. In literature, in English class, going all the way back to Greek literary theory, up through Sidney and Puttenham up until now, that relationship is defined by a term called synecdoche. It is a synecdochal relationship. And so we have this relationship of a part to a whole, both in shreds from the whole piece or a fleece from locks of wool. So locks are just a few drawn from the whole fleece. And so we have this weird relationship where he's saying fool, as if even somebody that's half blind won't know that you're just a part from the whole. And what does that mean, a part from the whole? What could that mean in the terms of literature or writing or poet-aping? I don't know. Let's not conclude too much because these are the first two lines we've unpacked, but something seems present there. Why a synecdochal relationship? Because maybe I want to argue that the whole idea that we're talking about the Stratford man, Shakespeare, as a front man or as a copycat or as a, fake real Shakespeare, maybe printing the Apocrypha or bad quartos. I guess that's maybe the claim that Dennis and Sabrina and Ross are making. It's still not quite clear what their claim is. And I believe they purposefully skirt the fence so they don't have to answer that. And I think Ross kind of openly says, I don't have to answer that. But I would like to put them all against the wall. If you mean to say that Shakespeare's the Poet-Ape, you have to tell me how. What is he doing to be called a Poet-Ape? So when he's brokering these plays, are we saying that he's just acting like Edward Juby as a secretary and passing it off to Lord Chamberlain's men, and that he's buying it up from De Vere or Marlowe or whoever is the real Shakespeare and he's just letting it be passed? That's his crime? Or is it that he's buying it up and then reworking it himself and then selling it off? And what's not clear to me is because most of them usually take the angle that he's not a good poet, he's not an artist, he is a cheap businessman trying to hustle money. But this guy makes hundreds of pounds with his farm back in London. Like, he bought New Place for hundreds of pounds. He's not making hundreds of pounds flipping old brokered plays. Nobody's making hundreds of pounds flipping old brokered plays. Because one, that's not a real thing. You can't go buy somebody else's play for, say, the going rate was 10 pounds, right? So you're not going to buy somebody's old play for 10 pounds because you're not going to be able to flip it for any money. So you're going to have to try and buy it for like a pound or 2 pounds, right? Yeah. But then if you want to flip it, you have to do something to it to make it flip worthy, or else you're just going to have to resell it for that same value. So either you or somebody else is going to have to go and touch it up, make it better, do something to it. And so, well, if he's touching it up, then he is something of a poet. He is something of a writer. This whole idea that he's illiterate and those signatures aren't his, we have to toss it out the window. We have to say he's a writer. Okay, maybe let's go there. But as soon as we do that, why is he not part of the canonical works? Why is he this weird outcast where we're allowed to say that maybe De Vere or Marlowe or whoever is working with guys like Middleton or Peel or Green, but no, not working with that ninny from Stratford? Like, it seems an arbitrary isolation. It doesn't make sense. So what's going on? How do we unpack this? So I would argue that we unpack this by, one, not isolating Shakespeare, and two, understanding that it doesn't really make sense for him to, okay, if I'm not a poet, I'm going to go buy this for £1. I'm going to have to go pay somebody a few pounds to rework it, and then I'm going to try and have to sell it. God hope that I can sell it for £10. All that work doesn't seem like worth much a profit. But two, why would that guy that's getting hired by Shakespeare to rework it not just do that crap himself? Let's be parsimonious about this, folks. So if Shakespeare or Shakespeare, the Stratford man, were buying up old plays and hiring somebody to rework them,
Well, let's just start with that guy he's hiring to rework them, is buying up the old plays. And who would be the absolute best possible candidate in the mid to late 90s of doing this? Well, yeah, it's Thomas Dekker, right? And people argue, well, he doesn't do it that much. Well, we don't know what he does that much early on, but the few early plays we seem to have by him do seem to be reworks. Guy, Earl of Warwick, Old Fortunatus, those probably both aren't originally his plays. They're plays that he's touching up and reworking. It seems largely the case with Dekker that he's not too concerned about all these plots and trying to get his exact structures or ideas through. He collaborates with all people on all walks of plays, all genres. And he's able to sometimes fit in and chameleon himself and kind of write like them, and other times he seems to want to just more do his Dekker thing where he just lets characters ramble and drink and carouse and just kind of banter and do their quick wit, and that's great too. At some point, though, Dekker seems like stylistically, holistically, like from the ground up, Dekker's whole theory of literature, if you read enough Dekker, seems to go hand in hand with being a Poet-Ape. He's not worried about classical structures being perfectly accurately rendered. He's not worried about upholding Aristotelian unities. To hell with all that, Dekker says. He wants to give you basically what is a Dickensian scene of their world. And if not their world, a translated Dickensian scene of some historical world or some romantic world. That's what Dekker does. And he don't need no stinking structures to do that. He can just take whatever is given to him, use that the same way that these lazy fucks out here use generative AI. Yeah, you don't have to use the fucking robots, guys. There's plenty of generative AI here for you. You lazy pieces of donkey crap. Excuse my language. Sorry, donkeys. I didn't mean to associate you with these people. All right. That's another scene, not here nor there. Okay. Going back to On Poet-Ape, though. Let's go backwards up through the poem. So we've talked about the synecdochal relationship. We've talked about this term half-eyes, talked about fool. Let's look at the next few lines above this. He marks not whose 'twas first, and aftertimes may judge it to be his as well as ours. Well, that's the weird thing. We're getting this ours and his relationship. We still got this collective, this whole, and we have this part. So his, ours. Okay, all right. Just keep going. And it's interesting that there's this sense of priority to it. There's almost like this order. Like there's multiple steps here.
Well, I mean, when he says he marks not whose 'twas first, it's basically saying, yeah, you're not giving credit to the original creator of
the source play.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And so going up further, in told of this, he slights it. Tut. Such crimes the sluggish gaping auditor devours. So the first part's really straightforward, right? Told of this, he slights it. So all these complaints that this poem's made, this guy says, I don't like that. I don't agree with it. That you've pissed me off. He's slighted by the argument. He feels offended. He's taken umbrage. If this is Shakespeare, we have zero evidence of Shakespeare ever taking umbrage from anybody. If they want to say it's a bad quarto or an apocryphal play, where is the moment that Shakespeare ever shows umbrage, that he is slighted, that he does not like being called a Poet-Ape? Where's that moment? And I know people say, well, this isn't just only literary. It could have been just Shakespeare arguing with him in a bar or something. And it's like, okay, yeah, let's go down the Drummond freaking
we're in
rabbit
an anonymous
hole.
movie territory,
Yeah,
literally
exactly.
that kind of painting those
let's
scenes.
Let's conjecture all away. Sure. Like, let's make up stop partying characters like Lord Wessex while we're at it. Like let's just have fun with it. No. And so told of this, he slights it. Well, I just want to point out that at one point, Ben Jonson called Thomas Dekker a poet-ape, and Thomas Dekker showed clear evidence that he was slighted by that by responding with a play of his own, Satyromastix, which literally rips off half of its characters from Poetaster in the most tongue-in-cheek fashion, right? So, okay, that line makes way more sense for Dekker than it possibly would have any Shakespeare Poet-Ape type. And if you want to argue that this is going after the canonical writer of Shakespeare, that is possible. That actually does work. Because there are probably moments in Troilus and Cressida and Twelfth Night that could be attacks on Ben Jonson. It's not as nearly obvious or straightforward as Satyromastix, where he's like, you called me a poet-ape. Your mama's fat. And it's like, he doesn't, my words, not his. But we do get, Tharcides railing on Ajax, and people said, Ajax may be this Ben Jonson character that's so full of himself that doesn't realize nobody really likes him. No matter how strong he is, and clearly he is strong, but he can get rage baited into doing anything you want him to. And Tharcides is thought to be the Marston character, right? And it would, I'm just going to pitch my Dekker thing real quick. It would make sense to me that Dekker has a hand in the canonical Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, and that possibly it is his Troilus and Cressida as seen in the Henslow Diary from 98 or 99, which would put it right at the start of that poet war, or that maybe it's a touched-up version of that Dekker play at any rate, because, those are the two parties other than Dekker that are part of this. And maybe there's something of Malvolio in Ben Jonson as well, and I've heard people argue the opposite, that Malvolio is John Marston, because of the closeness to the name Malevole from Marston's Malcontent. But I have this own kind of wacky take that Malvolio's a bizarre, inversion of a lot of Ben Jonson tendencies, as well as an amplification of a lot of Ben Jonson tendencies. And if Ben Jonson's maybe part of the Romeo and Juliet composition, perhaps Ben Jonson has something to do with the Benvolio character, which means good-willed. Malvolio means ill-willed. But Benvolio can also mean Ben-willed, as in Benjamin Jonson-willed, right? And so Malvolio is maybe a take on that Benvolio name. You're the evil Benvolio, which it's still the same guy, right? And such that Aguecheek, Toby, and Maria are Shakespeare and Company, maybe Company being Marston and Dekker, and Shakespeare being maybe Mary Sidney, and that those three are railing on Ben Jonson, and that's just the summation of the Poets' War. And you can take this and run with it. I think I'm the only person that's ever made this reading, and I think it's maybe got some legs to it, if not exactly right. But at any rate, that argument wouldn't make any damn sense with the whole Shakespeare's just the apocryphal or bad Cordo Poet-Ape, or just the brokering, non-writing, non-playwriting person. None of those would make sense with these lines. The second line, the sluggish gaping auditor devours, that's a little more cryptic. Is he talking about a third party? Is he talking about time itself? Is he talking about the Poet-Ape himself? I'm not sure, and if you got to take on that, sound off in your comments. But go up a few more lines, and we see, to a little wealth and credit in the scene, he takes up all, each man's wit his own. I've already gone over that wholesale. It works a ton with Dekker. I don't think it works as well with Shakespeare. His wealth is already kind of there, and it's not a little wealth, it's a lot of wealth. He has a lot of money comparatively to other playwrights. Says, and then the lines above it, at first he made low shifts with pick and glean. And so here's some language and diction that I want to point out. Pick and glean. One picks and gleans at a fripper or a broker, aka a pawn store. where you can go buy old used clothes, something like a Plato's Closet. That's literally what it is. And so,
And Glean definitely has the association of wanting to determine the hidden value of something, right?
Yes.
Like I gleaned that it was actually,
Yeah.
worthy to invest in or something.
yeah. And so, would buy the reversion of old plays. And so, when you buy the reversion of old plays, you are basically buying it for your company. You don't just some independent contractor go independently buy it from some other independent author. The companies own the plays. And so when a company reverts on a play, it's that company no longer wants to own it. And that ownership's essentially the closest thing that they have to copyright, at least for the writers of it. The copyright in their time, she says it doesn't exist. It doesn't in any sort of official codified standard that we would think. But a semblance of copyright does exist, and it's much more for the printers themselves than it is for the authors, because they're the ones that get stuck with extra prints. They're the ones that have to deal with getting all the printing press materials and paying for it. They're the ones putting out the cost, essentially. So they're the ones that need to have the stationer's registry stuff going and get some sort of, proto-copyright protection. It's not really about the authors or authorship. And so this pick and glean, this brokerage sort of language, it's about, like pawn shop stuff. It's old crummy crap. And this guy's buying.
Yeah, here's a play that got booed off stage.
Yeah.
That didn't go well. Or here's one that has like no one could figure out how to do this fourth act, and good luck or whatever. Whatever situation that someone could be like, oh yeah, sure, Dekker. Oh, I'll just throw that away and whatever it needs to be.
Absolutely. And so Ben Johnson's using this kind of language for a reason. Why all the pawn shop poor stuff? What's with all the poor metaphors? What's with the fabric metaphors? What's that got to do with Shakespeare? Why that language? Okay. Go up a few more lines. From brokage is become so bold a thief as we the robbed leave rage and pity it. Okay. So this is an interesting set of lines, because it says, all right, he's going from picking and gleaning these crummy old plays to basically picking and gleaning good plays, picking and gleaning from our stuff that's current, with something presumably like a commonplace book. And so he's going around and just taking other people's lines, other people's ideas, and turning them into his own, and sort of saying, yeah, I turned it into my own, so it is my own. I take the credit. And that really pisses off Ben.
It's kind of like the idea of Vanilla Ice using the Queen bass line for a song or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, I took your bass line and I made my own thing out of it, you know?
Yeah.
And, this is, the Freddie Mercury and crew, or at the time, I guess he's dead by then, but
right.
Whatever else is, suing him for it.
Right. And it's like, Dekker's essentially doing that. He's essentially a DJ or an electronic artist that's not citing his samples, which, I don't know if you guys are familiar with barber beats. Are you familiar with barber beats? It's sort of one of the subgenres of this lo-fi chill hop instrumental scene. And so like Macro Blank or Haircuts for Men or any artists like that, you may not know them by name, but you've definitely seen the barber beats style covers on the thumbnails on YouTube. They'll have some old like faded black and white picture of a statue with, and then like next to it will be like Japanese letters and stylized writing, and it'll be like volume 3 beats or something. And like basically they're just taking 80s and 90s electronic artists and doing very little to change the song, maybe speeding it up, maybe adding a few tracks, some filters, that stuff, and then just kind of maybe DJ flowing it into another song, transition to another song. And they just put the songs out like it's their songs, and they just call it their songs, and they don't source any of the samples or any of that stuff. Whereas, like, I know a lot of the lo-fi artists that I listen to, like, they sample that stuff, and it's hard to find how they get the sample, but they do actually, the good ones pay for the rights to do it. So like Flaminosis on his Cosmic Feelings song, he went and paid Night Flight for the rights to that song. And so, you know, a lot of people are like, hey, to the Night Flight guy, like, does it piss you off that this is more famous than your song? He's like, well, no, my song's now getting more famous than it ever did in the 70s. And, two, he reached out to me and offered me money for it. And I told him, yeah, I would love that. And so, no, so none of that's like totally codified like it is now back in their day. But Ben has a much more modern take than, say, Dekker. Dekker is like laissez-faire, Wild West. It's everybody's words. It's anybody's words. Anybody can use them, put them together better than me. I don't care. Steal my stuff. I'll steal your stuff. What difference does it make? It doesn't bother me. And in fact, that seems to be the sort of...
you might be able to argue that, there's nothing new under the sun, go jump at yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And like, there's that sense to Dekker's character as a whole, over his lifetime, that even in the Poets' War, he's not really embroiled in the sense that Marston and Johnson are. And people argue even if Johnson and Marston are actually angry or have vitriol, but Dekker clearly doesn't. This seems more of a hired mercenary effort, is how it's portrayed, that the Lord Chamberlain's men kind of need somebody to come in and quelch this Poets' War, needs to put a last final word on it and kind of put Johnson in his place. That's how it gets characterized. And it's interesting that Dekker's the guy that gets brought in to do it, since they have Shakespeare in their realm, supposedly. Yeah, my bad. Let's continue with the poem. As we, the robbed, leave rage and pity it. So this is interesting. I think people mistakenly read this line that, we get robbed and then we get really pissed about it. But no, that's not what he says. He says we leave rage and pity it. So we let go of our anger and we just, God damn it, dude. This stupid idiot, he thinks it's good. He thinks it's a good thing. I can't help but feel sorry for him, because this broke loser is just trying so hard. He has no idea what he's doing. He's just trying whatever he can. I want to be mad at him for writing bad stuff, but it's just sad. It's not even worth being angry about. But this pity, this pick and glean, this pawn shop stuff, this poorness. Well, keep that in mind, poorness. Go to the first two lines. Poor Poet-Ape. And so this is something I want to really drive home. It opens on the word poor. It might open on the word poor because this Poet-Ape constantly has no money. It wouldn't make sense to describe Shakespeare, the super rich, wealthy, super successful actor, as the poor Poet-Ape. I mean, maybe there's some tongue-in-cheek irony there, but that's not really ever the argument I hear. It would make more sense if it's a guy that's constantly in debt, who has money but can't seem to keep money, who loses it as fast as he gets it and has to go borrow more on account of it. Almost like Merchant of Venice kind of thing, And so, yeah, that's our Poet-Ape. It's a poor person who has to go to the pawn shop and go broker poor crap and try to rework it into his own to make money. And so it says, poor Poet-Ape that would be thought our chief. And so this is the line that gets everybody all caught up and twisted. It's that would be thought our chief. Everybody seems to think that must mean Shakespeare. By the time this poem's probably written, Meres has already published Shakespeare's Just the Greatest and the Bee's Knees. Dekker and Johnson get mentioned. A lot of other guys get love, but Shakespeare does seem to get the biggest amount of love. So this must be about Shakespeare. But there's no sense that Shakespeare's anything like a chief, because a chief has to be part of that whole. And Shakespeare's never thought to be writing with any of these guys. Any of the guys that get called writing with Shakespeare are either dead by the time this poem's written, or are not writing by the time this poem is written. So how could he be the chief writer? How could he work with any of those guys? Chief is in best, maybe, but not chief is in top guy in charge. It wouldn't be our chief. It would just be the chief. but it's our chief, as in charge of us, our executive, our top officer. Well, that would totally make sense if we're talking about Thomas Dekker, who gets more, tasks or writing jobs for Henslow, pens more plays, collaborates with more people. If he's the top guy on each of those plays and telling people what to do, guess what? Guess what you might call him? You might call him the fucking chief. He's the chief. And that's why he's the top paid writer, the most prolific writer in the Henslow Diary. It makes tons of sense. But let's look at that next line. Whose works are in the frippery of wit. And so, there could be several ways to read this line. We could get the sense that it's just filled with wit. There's just too much wit. There's so much wit that there's an overflow, that there's trash, that there's frippery, it's just the wittiest stuff ever. But there's also the other sense, that the more obvious sense that, frippery, this is just the dregs of the wit. Frippery is the trading of old used clothes. And so he's saying your works are just the quintessential, retelling of other people's stuff. You're literally just your wits itself frippery.
It goes back to that pawn shop, the hand-me-down or motifs or something along those lines.
And so why all the pawn shop stuff? Why all the dresser stuff? Why all the fabric stuff? Well, I think that it all relates to Thomas Dekker's name. Dekker, as in decorator, is a synonym and a actual sort of occupation as a fripper or a broker, or in this sense, literally with plays, a play dresser. And so you're not a play dresser if you're a playwright. You're a playwright. You're a play dresser if you are reworking something that is already a play. And as a play dresser, which Ben Jonson explicitly makes that pun clear in the Poetaster, as a play dresser, yes, that's what he gets called. Demetrius' character in Poetaster is called a play dresser, and it's because it is a pun on Dekker's name, a Dekker or decorator of plays. I think that's what all of this language is getting at. That it's literally just him dressing up plays, and he's not even dressing it up with fine silks or something like that. He's dressing it up with old pawnbroke crap. And at some point when he wants to be good, he can't just use the pawn shop stuff. He has to use our stuff, and that's why everybody thinks he's great, and that's what makes him look great. But it's really just our stuff. And so I want to argue that this works well with just Dekker's work itself. If we just only look at Dekker, which is rarely only just Dekker, there's maybe 2-3 plays that are only Dekker, because all the rest of Dekker's plays are co-written. I think this works. If we're talking about Patient Grissel, it's totally jacking from Romeo and Juliet right and left, right? Troilus and Cressida has an odd relationship with Troilus and Cressida.
Does he have a taming play?
He has a play called The Medicine for a Cursed Wife that comes out in 1600, maybe related to the taming play, or plays. We don't know because that's not in print. We have him picking up history plays right around the time when history plays get picked up. He's not this gigantic original structuralist. He's definitely going with the zeitgeist of the times. He's picking up what is hot and trying to do his own spin on that. So, all in all, I just want to argue once again, maybe for a final time, that this just makes way, way, way more sense if he's talking about Thomas Dekker. I also maybe want to argue that beyond just talking about Thomas Dekker, that this sonnet could make more sense than anything if we mean Dekker is a part of canonical Shakespeare and or apocryphal Shakespeare. And there is a sense that Dekker is present in a lot of apocryphal Shakespeare. London Prodigal, Thomas Lord Cromwell, Merry Devil of Edmonton, possibly Musidorus or even Locrine. Dekker may have a hand in just about all of Shakespeare Apocrypha. It would be completely, totally possible. And furthermore, as a canonical thing, I just want to continue to maybe push the possibility that something like a group of writers in something maybe like a writer's studio, possibly connected to concealed aristocrats, possibly led by, run by, and co-authored by concealed aristocrats, could totally be happening at this time, and that a reading of this poem, in that sense, might elucidate this poem more. I don't want to too much circularly prove one with the other. I don't think that that's going to be too helpful right now. But I want to get that suggestion out there, that hypothetical out there for people to start thinking about when they're reading poems like this or reading other works. Because there is this weird synecdochal relationship between the Poet-Ape and Johnson and the rest of them, whoever they are. And why that weird collective synecdochal relationship is there is not clear to me with any other reading of this, whether orthodox or heterodox. And so I'm trying to do something to make a reading of it, to make sense of that synecdochal relationship, because it's not some metonymic relationship where you have this thing standing in place for a separate other. It is part of it that is standing in place of it. And so maybe Dekker, as part of the canonical Shakespeare, is going and printing apocryphal Shakespeare as Shakespeare, where it's more just him and more just his project, and maybe it's not only his pen, but these are his sort of little side ventures to try and get money. And it's not the official stuff, it's the apocryphal stuff. And as such, you have Ben Jonson saying, as if even blind people wouldn't realize this isn't the canonical stuff. That would make the reading to me make a ton of sense. It kind of combines the two readings where, yeah, you can have the sort of fake Shakespeare reading, but you can also have a more accurate Dekker reading. That would be my way to combine the two. I think it is much of a stretch as that may seem. It still makes way more sense than the Shakespeare thing. And there's some other nitty-gritty details, like the publication of Sir John Oldcastle or the lines in Parnassus plays as relate to satiromastix that may just point to that. It may just actually point to that there's a push right around the early 1600s that Dekker's just going to go do the Shakespeare project himself. I, once again, still don't know quite what that would entail as a whole, and I need to put that together, but that's going to be on my plate, and I'm going to be looking at that. I think that about wraps it up here. I hope this was informative. I hope this wasn't too redundant, because I know we've gone over Dekker and Poet-Ape several videos here. But I wanted to sort of clarify some points that I didn't get to make in that other one. That, you know, Poet-Ape's not an actor. It doesn't have to be an actor, and people making that reading are basing it off of a misreading of Ben Jonson's play, which if you read all of Ben Jonson's play, that very play, he basically tells you that Dekker's the guy he's attacking anyway. Yeah, if you go read Satiromastix, you'll go find that Dekker's really funny, and he's a really talented guy, and you should probably check him out. Because I'm thinking if you're doubting that Dekker's Poet-Ape, you probably haven't read much Dekker. I'm going to just go out there and say it. Like, if you're someone that's like, it's got to be Shakespeare and it's not Dekker, just pray tell, how much Dekker have you read? Like, you know, whip it out. I want to see it, you know?
Show me that Dekker.
Yeah, you know, shake that spear. Okay. On that note, getting a little silly here, so maybe we can wrap it up. Brady, any last thoughts on this?
No, I think it's just a good addition to this whole, Poet War stuff, Poet-Ape stuff, Labia stuff. And, that's what we sort of offer here, right? Is that, you just kind of broke down a sonnet and even when we do book club, analysis too, when we do our Shakespeare analysis, it ultimately comes down to, like, who can read the best,
Mm-hmm.
Like when we're sort of critiquing Feldman or Spellman or critiquing Ross Bobber or whatever, right? We are sort of critiquing their capabilities of, like, reading the text, and I'm not saying they're, like, stupid or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, that's where we're sort of coming in and applying what we think we know about the text and, like, how that applies to the time period or whatever. And, now it's time for y'all to decide who has the best reading of this, who has the best understanding of that. And then if you like this, if this makes most sense with this one poem, well, Shakespeare's got 154 sonnets we got to go through, right? Let's, this is just one thing that maybe has, if, you trust how we did this one, like, and but the Dark Lady sonnets and the young, that's so cryptic. And it's like, maybe we just start looking at writing. If we know boom, you have Dekker. This kind of clicks in a lot more sense instead of being like, maybe this is also about Shakespeare again, and this is also. It's like no, it's like yes and no. Like Shakespeare is a part of whatever's going on here, but it's not. It's
only
not just,
Shakespeare.
Yeah. And so just I don't know, exegesis. It's been like something that's on my mind recently, and I think that's a great demonstration of actually understanding a lot of this stuff. So, and critiquing once again, the wider Shakespeare about cherry picking quotes and like I got my author, blah blah blah. I found this one line out of 400 pages, and it's like, well, we probably have to read all 400 pages just to make sure, right? You don't know.
And I find that, I don't read every poem backwards, but just with this particular one, it worked particularly well. See, we do read it forwards and backwards. But I found it worked particularly well with this because it is the first line that gets people tripped up and caught in an assumption. And so if you read it backwards, you get to go through the poem without that assumption. And then when you get to that first line that's supposed to be that assumption, it's all of a sudden not this assumption, and you go the other way. And so, I don't know, maybe I want to even use that as weight for my idea that this is still talking about Dekker as part of Shakespeare, and that assumption is put there purposely, and that, anybody that's like, Chance, like, our chief, the best writer, it's got to be Shakespeare. Like, well, I got a reading for that. I got you. I got you covered, on that note, I guess we can wrap it up. Any announcements or anything that we got coming up down the pipeline here?
I'm in talks with John Michael Greer again to kind of maybe close the year out, see how that's going. So check back for that. Otherwise, we'll probably put out. The last 2 years we've done like an end of the year sort of recap of things, and our stack for reading. We covered a lot of Shakespeare in this book club. It's been really really cool. So I think we'll maybe kind of talk about that as well. But otherwise, I think that's most of the announcements for the rest of this year anyway.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing on my plate for a future video would maybe doing a state of the SAC. There's been a lot of stuff changing, especially since post-Alexander Waugh. A lot of stuff on the Oxfordian side, kind of broiling, brewing. A lot of other candidates are starting to get weight and following. Shakespeare's popping up in the fiction scene again. Hamnet the movie, Jodi Picoult's novel. Some more independent writers are starting to put out Shakespeare stuff as well.
Taylor Swift and her new
Taylor Swift's new album. She's going back to her roots, Romeo. There's maybe a little bit of a push and momentum swaying back towards us after what was maybe kind of a lull. And so maybe some little fomentation momentum can kind of get some things going, and maybe we'll start to see some change happening soon in this SAC scene as a whole in the next year or so. So that's maybe my prediction for 2026, to see some kind of big changes happen.
All right. Well, as always, the links are down below in the description box. Come join our Patreon. One-time payment will get you a lifetime sort of Discord access so you can hang out with us, or pay for the Areopagus Book Club monthly, so we meet every single week and discuss some Shakespeare or relevant materials. And so if that interests you, if you thought we did a good job, come on by and support the channel. Channel members, thank you so much. Titus and Emmanuel, y'all are the best. Y'all are the bee's knees. Thank you to all of our Patreon members as well. David, the Champion Book Club member as well. Thank you so much for all the support. And otherwise, as just like we did with the poem, just like we do with everything, Nullius in Verba.